Hello, my name is Richard Haight, and today in this video, I'd like to address a number of emails regarding God, which I've received. And so, first, let me read some of the basic points that I've received. So, first is, how do I stick to the words of God, since I find it difficult for me. I find it to be difficult for me, pardon me. That's one from Ibrahim Lom. Then another, I'm not sure where these people are from, doesn't say, is from Sylvia, and this person says, I still don't understand why my path is difficult. I always ask myself, why me? I see people succeed, yet I can't say they've been good. I have been doing everything, gone for confessions, obeying the 10 Commandments, but I am still stagnant. The clock is ticking. Still, I do not know who I am. It's so painful. Thank you, Sylvia. And the next one, there are other emails, but these are maybe kind of summarize most of the others. I believe in, this is from Mogre, by the name, I'm guessing Africa, maybe, Ghana, not sure. I believe God, but he makes me feel like I'm alone in here. At times I feel sad, lost, and hopeless. Okay, so there's a lot here to address. The first point is that we have to remember that the word God is a word that it comes from, well, it's not a Hebrew word. There are other words that the Hebrews use to describe God, and those words have changed throughout history. And the descriptions of God have changed throughout history. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that these people are Christian. And in the event that they are Christian, we'll just sort of start from there. The first thing to understand is that God, as we perceive it and has been taught, has been filtered through thousands of years of culture, thousands of years of language change and evolution, thousands of years of identification, of idolization, and confusion. And that makes the message highly, highly distorted. So I guess the first place to start with is the word God itself, and whatever words that the Hebrew use, maybe Jehovah, for example. Hebrew is a grammatically gendered language. Like Latin is a grammatically gendered language. I found this when I was living in Mexico, that mountains are considered female and money is considered male. So we have el dinero, which is money, el is male, and los montanos, which is female for mountains. Latin, this stems from Latin. The Hebrew does the same thing. It's just part of their culture. And it is each noun, maybe pronoun, and those sort of things are given as a part of the language, are automatically connected to a gender. It has to be one or the other. So God either had to be male or female. Now, I find it interesting that for example, in Latin, let's go back to the basics. So the concept of yin or yin yang is the Chinese symbol which has a black on one side and a white on the other side. Now, this symbol is a Chinese symbol. It represents a concept that is really it's a universal concept for ancient cultures. It's just the awareness that there is sort of for lack of a better term, a spirit to things. That there's a duality, that something is high, something is low, something is far, something is distant, something is light, something is dark. Something is visible, something is invisible, something is hard, something is soft. It's a basic concept that is greatly mystified by the West for whatever reason. It's not a very complex concept, but it is very reflective of what happens in duality and how the brain itself works. So in the brain itself, the brain is also hemispheric. So there's two halves of the brain, and you have one, which is the left hemisphere. Generally speaking, it can vary from different person to person, what I'm saying here, which is knowledge, information, language-based. And then the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is a serial processor, which means it has to jump from thought to thoughts. It focuses on one thing at a time. It can't do multitasking. It has to do one thing at a time. And then there's the right hemisphere, which is not what most people are actually is. It provides the emotional content. It is the primary driver of dreams, and it is what is maybe activated more when we're in peripheral vision. It is a what do you call it? It's I forgot the term, but it's able to take in much data at the same time and manipulate that data. So it's not a serial processor. It's never mind. Word doesn't spring to mind. But the information of the right hemisphere is largely that which comes through in the unconscious mind. It's the emotions. It's not the obvious. It's not language. It comes through in feeling. So we could say that the right hemisphere represents the dark part of the yin yang symbol, the dark half, and the left hemisphere represents the light half. That the left hemisphere is the visible, your thoughts and your identification, and the right hemisphere is the invisible, the emotions, dreams, things that are not understood. It deals with things. Right hemisphere deals with things that are maybe not understood, chaotic things, and whereas the left hemisphere is about order and the known knowledge. But the same thing with gender. So what is visible is a penis, the male gender. It's visible, it's sticking out, it's obvious. That's male by this sort of dual perspective. And the female gender is invisible. The content of the vagina is inside, and therefore it's dark, it's invisible. Therefore, female has been associated with the dark part of the yin-yang symbol, and male has been associated with the light part of the yin-yang symbol. It's important that we do not interpret this as good and evil, or we don't interpret this as right or wrong. This is just a representation of what is female and male, according to language. Now, Hebrew has its own way of codifying the language through gender. It didn't make sense to me in Spanish that a mountain was los montaños, which is female, because a mountain is quite visible, right? You'd think, well, mountain, because it's visible, would be male. And then, maybe a valley would be female, right? That would make sense. But language evolves, and sometimes it doesn't follow the rules. All languages they're sort of malleable, and they sort of take unexpected curves as a popular person says this or that and breaks the rules, and it just sort of gets taken on. Maybe someone wrote a poem that broke the rules, and that poem caught on, and now people use the female word for the mountain instead of male, or stuff like that happens. It's just language. Hebrew would be no different in that respect. We don't know why in Hebrew God was called male. And the very obvious reason is that duality, whatever God is no specific thing. It's a transcendent being, which means it's throughout all that is. This is described in the by the Hebrew and certainly by Jesus as being the Alpha and the Omega. Alpha is, if we look at the Hebrew alphabet, Alpha would be equivalent to the English A in the alphabet, and the Omega would be equivalent to the Z in our alphabet. But in Hebrew, the alphabet represents both numbers and letters. So quite literally, it is all that is. It's the entire alphabet as it represents numbers and letters. So God doesn't actually equal the alphabet. That's just a metaphor. It's a hint. God is all that is. It's the Alpha and the Omega. It's the first and it's the beginning and the end, and everything in between. Which means that there is nothing that is not God. Now, someone asked Jesus what God looks like, and Jesus says, now, mind you, I'm not Christian. I'm just discussing this with Christians, potentially, who are having difficulties with the teachings of Christianity and applying them to their lives in a way that is fruitful. And so I'm going to use Christian metaphor, Christian language, Hebrew terminology, so that they understand that what I'm talking about isn't just pulled out of nowhere. It's not just my fancy. So Jesus was asked, I don't remember where in the Bible. I don't remember Bible verses well in terms of, which number they are in the Bible and that kind of thing. You can look it up yourself. If you're motivated enough to do so, if your question is serious, you'll look it up. A man comes to Jesus and asks, "What does God look like?" And Jesus says, "No man can see the face of God." That he describes God as the Alpha and the Omega, all that is. Well, the Alpha and Omega, all that is, transcends specific form, but it's through all specific form. So it's equivalent of saying that God is everything, which also means God is you. Which also means that God is neither male or female or both or neither. So first step in order to unbind God, because we have created God in our image. This is a very, very important point. We've turned God into an idol. An idol is a false image which we worship. The image that you have in your mind, whether it be a feeling level image or an actual visual level image in your mind, is an idol, a false idol. And what you are doing is worshiping that. That is idol worship, forbidden, incidentally, by God. Now, or described as a sin. Sin means to miss the mark, an inaccurate aim. It doesn't mean you are cursed. It doesn't mean you are evil. To sin, it simply means that you have an errant concept. You have an errant aim. Your aim has been amiss. You cannot find or discover all that is through the image of a male, or any image for that matter. So God is not male, nor God is female. It is both and all and neither, transcending all of that. So the first step, if one wishes to get in touch with that most fundamental thing, is to go through and start really erasing or seeing through or disbelieving the images that have been fed through the church. There's certain images that we have that are fed through the church. A lot of people, if you really investigate the image that you have in your mind, you might discover that it kind of looks a lot like Moses, a guy with a beard, an old guy with a beard, right? Well, that's the first step, is to degender God. Not be bound by gender. Nor is God a name. That again is an attempt to define God, to attach a sound specific to God, to limit God to a specific sound. God is it transcends that. Don't put God in your image. Don't put God in your sound. I mean, you're welcome to do that, but if you wanted to get through these blockages, you need to unbind the concept of God and remove it as a concept entirely. God cannot be a concept and have any transformative power. So one of the questions is, I want to know who God is. I want to be closer to God. I want to know who God is. Another question is, I still do not know who I am. When you really search out the nature of you, you will discover that you also transcend time, space, definitions. That there is no way to ever truly understand who or what you are. Whatever it is that you fundamentally are transcends anything that you could ever describe. There is no image that fits you. Incidentally, that same, my point there, also applies to God. One does not enter into Eden carrying such baggage. One can only enter into Eden purely. No thing can enter into Eden, which means only purity, only non-content can enter into Eden. Give up these false idols, give up these identifications to enter into Eden. There are no exceptions to this. Religion is a construct of humanity. The Ten Commandments are a means through which society is constructed. The Ten Commandments will not bring you to the awareness of the most fundamental. They will allow you to live with your neighbor, hopefully without killing each other. Now, of course, if you kill your neighbor, your conscience will speak against you and you will not be able to enter back into Eden because you will be carrying something, a conscience that speaks against you. Your mind will not be clear. Your heart will not be clear. So it's not that the Ten Commandments are wrong, so to speak. These are just basic rules for living in a good society and being relatively sound as a human being. Don't steal. Well, if you steal, you're in a way stealing from yourself. That's a long, long story there, which we don't need to get into right now, since we're dealing with fundamental concepts of Christianity and God. What I would recommend is, if you are serious about your relationship with God, the first step is to realize that God is not different from you. There is no other. If you are outside of God, then Jesus' statement that God is the Alpha and Omega is incorrect. Either that or you are incorrect. If God is the Alpha and Omega, God is also you. So you cannot have a relationship with God if you are God, if you are equal to God, so to speak. Now, the mind will play with that and turn it into an identification. I am God. Don't make that mistake. I'm not saying that. I used those words. Pardon me. It was a mistake. There is no other. The most fundamental thing cannot be described. Neither can you. Maybe those two things fundamentally are not different. Rest in that. There's a saying in the Bible, be silent, for I am God. Be silent. Let go of the mental baggage. Let go of the false idols of your imagination. Stop believing them. Find the place of silence. And there, maybe you will find what you've been looking for. The true you, the most fundamental, and maybe, we can't be sure because we have no idea what others were thinking in the past, maybe what Jesus was describing as the Alpha and the Omega, and also describing as the Father. Again, that's Hebrew. It's gendered and male. He had to speak in a way that worked with that society. There wasn't free speech in ancient Jerusalem. You could be killed for using the wrong words. You could be killed for speaking honestly. If I had said that the human being at the most fundamental level is connected or is not different than the Alpha and the Omega is the Alpha and Omega, that most fundamental, non-describable place within the human, I would be crucified. So, quite naturally, the words of teachers back then were veiled, were disguised. And it was up to the listener to hear through all the veil, hear through the disguise, see through the disguise, hear through the disguise. You needed the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Do you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear? Let's see. I'm going to make sure that I've answered all of the questions. How do I stick to the words of God since I find it difficult for me? Understand that the words of God, that's a religious concept. And concepts are not transcendent. They're of the mind. What is it that God is it transcends mind. It runs through mind, but it also transcends it. And so human words is not what is meant by the words of God. Whatever you think words mean, that's not what the word of God means. And if you could describe the word of God, that isn't the word of God. Because whatever you could put into words is limited by your tiny understanding. No insult. By my tiny understanding. By all humans' limited understanding. By the mind's dual perspective. The way that it automatically encodes things in opposites, in words that are separated for communication purposes. Any word that you could describe is, or think of, or consider, is not the word of God. And let's see, make sure that I've... Confession. I've done everything, gone to confession, obeying the 10 Commandments, but I'm still stagnant. What that means is that one is still stuck in mind. One is still stuck in false ideas. One still believes that the content of mind, the words we've heard from our pastor, all of these things equal the godly experience. But the godly experience utterly transcends words. Let go of those things. To have or to experience directly. At times I feel sad, lost, and hopeless. We feel sad, lost, and hopeless because we are in mind. Mind is about survival. And although the yin and yang would show mind as the white part, like the left hemisphere, the logical and all that stuff as the left part and white, and the unseen as dark, black. The reality is your information, your knowledge will never fulfill. There will always be a disconnect because there's a kind of fundamental arrogance in knowledge when we believe it to be true. When we live our lives in knowledge, thoughts, concepts, what we're doing is we're worshiping that knowledge, those thoughts, those concepts. And God transcends that. So what you have been worshiping is amiss. So quite naturally, you will feel sad, lost, and hopeless. The more that one rests in that left hemisphere of knowledge and belief and concepts, the smaller is the inner space. The more black and white things start to feel, the more condemnation, judgment, the more vulnerable, the less connected we feel. There will, of course, be sad, lost, hopelessness. And because there's sad, lost, hopelessness, then we start looking even more into knowledge. We start projecting even more into the future, which then looks even more hopeless. It's a downward spiral until we see this process long enough and have insight into the limitations of knowledge. We won't stop doing it. We will not stop doing it. It will be like a woodpecker on a concrete pole. It will just keep pecking and pecking and pecking until it gets a headache or dies. So we're like that woodpecker. I'm no different than you. I pecked a lot, got a lot of headaches. I felt sad, lost, and hopeless. I invested a lot of my time in religious concepts. And that's not wrong. I had to go through that. I had to go through that. If someone had told me otherwise, I probably wouldn't have listened to them. So I'm not expecting that anybody would listen to me on this point. And I mean no disrespect to religions or any of that. I mean, our societies are based upon knowledge and concepts. And I don't want to say it's wrong. I'm just saying that there's a limitation to that. And we should be quite careful about putting such limitations on the most fundamental thing, on the alpha and the omega. I hope this helps in some small way, and have a good day. If you have any questions, thoughts, insights, any difficulties you'd like to share, if you would like to ask me about something, contact at richardhaight.net. You can look below, and I will have links available for where you could find more resources, as well as my contact email address. And don't forget to subscribe. I have lots of videos coming up. So hopefully you're enjoying this. Thank you. Bye-bye.